look into the theory, the modern theory on color vision, right? So did you guys read up in the notes a little bit about the earlier theories? All right, so what do you know about the trichromatic theory?
Wait, one second.
That what theory?
That you have only blue, green, and red, and the colors that we see are mixed up with.
Right, so we see three colors. Well, it says that our color receptors, are those the rods or the cones? Cones, the color receptors in our retina can only see three colors, blue, green, and red. And that everything else that we see is a combination of those colors to some extent. So trichromatic, three color, right? That one kind of makes sense. All right, and what about the other, the opponent process theory? What does that say?
It's either you see blue or yellow or red or green or black or white.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, so you can see colors as a result sort of their opposite. So you can see blue or yellow, red or green, and black or white. And there's some support to this because sometimes we can't see color combinations. There's some stuff in the book, a couple little puzzles. Did any of you guys look at those? Like, where they give you the little color diagrams and you can tell what you can see and not see and things like that. So those can be interesting to look at, just in support of some of these theories. But we take pieces from both of those sort of when we're looking at modern theory on this, and that's what's called our dual process theory. So dual process theory says that theoretically both of those are correct. And then it adds a little bit more to it from there, right? So the idea that color is processed at the retina by the cones, and that in that site it's that trichromatic manner, meaning there's only the three colors there, that is supported. Okay, so dual process theory agrees that at the retina, at the cones, that the trichromatic theory is correct. And that for opponent process theory, the idea that we can see one or the other when we're looking at it in the brain along that optic nerve is also correct. So in different stages, in different areas of processing, both theories are correct. So it's just not one or the other. All right, and then we talked about color blindness, right? Most people who are colorblind can see some color. Mostly men are colorblind. So it's either a red-green usually or a blue-yellow. And there are some people that can only see black or white. That's much less common though. Those are monochromats. But that's a much less common color blindness than red, green, or blue, yellow. All right. Any questions on color theory? Okay. So you're going to want to remember, your rods and cones and which function they have that differs, and our little diagram of the eye, which is so helpful for everyone, I'm sure. All right. So sight, vision, that was one of our big senses. We're going to move on to hearing now, also a big sense, right? So hearing is also called audition. Audition is the sense of hearing. Now, when we see, we're using light waves, right? How do we hear? Sound waves. Good. All right, so when we're hearing, the physical process of hearing is sound waves coming into our body and then somehow getting to the auditory nerve, which would take them to what part of the brain? Temporal. Yep, temporal lobe. Right here, right? Our temporal lobe. Okay, so we've got, our ears have a number of structures, ones that are on the outside that we can see and on the inside as well. All right, with another great drawing here. We're going to start with a little Mr. Dead Potato Head. dented potato head. Okay, so maybe I will just point so you guys understand where we're at. Okay, so we talk about the ear, we talk about the outer ear. And the outer ear, obviously, is what part of your ear? The part on the outside, right? Okay. So the three parts of your outer ear are your pinna, your auditory canal, and your eardrum. So your pinna is the cartridgey skin part of your outer ear, right? Auditory canal is the little part where you're not supposed to put Q-tips or anything smaller than your elbow or something. And then we have our eardrum, which is, if you ever put a Q-tip in your ear, the part that you can feel that you shouldn't go past, right? Also painful, but yeah, gross. Okay, so what the pinna does, this is like our little, it's a funnel for the auditory sound waves. What's it, like an amplifier? What would be a thing that focus sound waves?
Yeah, probably.
Okay, so that brings the sound waves in, and they come through the auditory canal into the eardrum. When they hit the eardrum, it's called a drum because it does something. What do you think it does? Vibrates, right? So the eardrum vibrates and then it sets into play a whole course of interactions that go down through the rest of our ear. So in our middle ear, which we can't see or feel from the outside, we have three tiny, tiny little bones. And they are the hammer, the anvil, and the stirrup. They're super small bones in your middle ear. Hammer, anvil, and stirrup. Okay, so your eardrum vibrates from these sound waves coming in, and that causes these three little bones also to vibrate. When the vibrations start in that middle ear, they become amplified, and then they go to the middle ear, and then they go to the inner ear. Now, in our inner ear, we have something called cochlea and cochlear fluid.
Is that part of the three parts?
Of the inner ear, yep. Cochlea and cochlear fluid. So, cochlear fluid is in a little, do you guys know we have fluid in our ears? Yeah, it looks like a shell. And we have little hairs along the side of it. And so when the vibrations start, the fluid starts to move a little bit, creates waves. The waves move the little basilar hairs, tiny little hairs we have in a tiny little shell with a tiny little ocean in our ears. Now it sounds like we're having some sort of hallucinations like we talked about, right? So the hair cells bend in response to the waves going, and that bends the basilar membrane. So just like with our other senses, this information all needs to be transformed into what kind of message? Yeah, neural. It needs to be transformed into a neural message to go along the auditory nerve, right? So the hairs bend and the basilar membrane bends, and that triggers neural messages, and those go to the brain along your auditory nerve to your temporal lobe, which is what we ended up with, right? All right, so let's go through it sort of from left to right again. We're going to start with sound waves. They're going to be sort of drawn into our ear by the pinna, the outer ear that we can feel. Then they go into the auditory canal and hit the eardrum, which causes that to vibrate. The vibrations from the eardrum go into the middle ear, where we have the hammer, anvil, and stirrup. Those little bones start vibrating. They're amplified and passed along to the inner ear. In the inner ear, we have cochlea and little canals and fluid. Those get vibrations from the middle ear, which creates waves in the cochlear fluid. As the waves go through, they bend the hair cells from the basilar membrane, which triggers a neural message which goes down the auditory nerve to the temporal lobes of our brains. You guys got that? That is the physical process by which we hear. And it's in the notes also. Don't worry. Has anybody ever had an ear infection or a bad ear infection?
I get one every year.
Okay, every year in both ears, that's fun. What kind of symptoms do we have besides pain? Sometimes your eardrum can burst if you have a bad infection.
That sounds horrible.
Your ears pop really bad.
Yeah, yep. Dizzy, that's one of the things I was going for, right? That fluid in our ears helps keep our balance. So if we have a bad ear infection, dizziness and like loss of balance can often happen.
I've got a headache.
Headache, absolutely.
I get a swollen throat.
Swollen throat. Well, we know our ear, nose, and throat are sort of connected, right? So there's a lot that can go wrong with our sound and hearing. You also have this bone here, mandible.
Yeah.
If you get a bad ear infection, you can get,
Or your jaws.
yep, your jaw starts hurting. You can get a bone infection in that bone, which is also
Oh, I've had
no good.
It's so awful.
Yeah, I had one of those this year. It's terrible. That's what's fresh in my memory, I think, too. It's particularly bad. All right, so we've got a lot, and our ears are responsible, I guess, for more than just hearing, right? We talked a little bit about balance. We also know that they're connected, obviously, to the temporal lobe, to your throat, things like that. So that's the physical process by which we hear. And we know that, again, we're starting with sound waves. So I want to talk about the properties of some of these sound waves a little bit. We talked about vision and light waves. What properties did they have? Mm-hmm. And one more. Frequency. Yep. Okay, so when we're talking about sound waves, we talk about frequency as well. Frequency with sound waves, anybody know? Pitch. Okay, so very high frequency, so a lot of completed waves within a cycle. Is that going to be a higher or lower pitch? Higher, right? Anybody want to demonstrate?
Like how you want to say?
Yeah, go ahead. Good, that was very high pitched. Thank you. Rex actually moved his head for that. He's back asleep now, but okay. So what about a very low pitch? That's going to be a low frequency. Let's go ahead, Alex. Yeah, sort of like a caveman, I think, was that. So that would be a very low frequency pitch. We also have amplitude. Amplitude is what?
Volume.
It's volume, and it's the height of the wave, right? So a very high amplitude, would that be quiet or loud? Loud. And a very low amplitude, right, okay. Now another property that auditory, that sound waves can have is called complexity. Different tones, yep. Okay, so that's how we have different tones. All right, so slightly different from our light waves. All right, so there's different theories on, just like there were in how we had color vision, there's different theories on how we hear. One is called place theory. So that's saying that our pitch perception, is anyone sort of musically inclined? Pitch perception. Okay, I have none of it, so for me it's not as easy to sort of comprehend. But place theory says that your pitch perception corresponds to the actual physical place on your basilar membrane that is most stimulated. So based on when these sound waves come in, a certain particular spot on your basilar membrane in there is hit by these particular waves, and that gives you pitch. So people that have better pitch, I think your auditory nerve would translate that more accurately, I would say. Now, having that, Shelby, is that something that you feel was natural or something that you sort of trained on, or a little bit of both? A little bit of both, okay. All right, so there's also something called frequency theory. So instead of having your, instead of it being where on the basilar membrane the light waves come in, this is sort of how frequently they do. So we know frequency, right, is how many times things happen. So if the basilar membrane is firing these neural messages at the same frequency as the sound wave, that's the pitch that you get, right? So we know the property of the waves coming in. If that causes your basilar membrane to move with the same frequency, to have the same time, that's how you get your pitch perception on those. So those are two different theories on pitch perceptions. Okay. Now, just like with vision, just like with other senses, we can have problems, right? We know that people can be deaf fully, partially, and there's a couple different kinds of deafness. People, as we get older, just like we had to start reading further away, right? You guys, if you go to visit your grandparents, do you find yourself talking a little louder?
Yes.
Right? My dad gets older and he says, "What?" a lot more. You know? So there's some parts of our hearing that are just sort of come on with age. In general, our whole situation starts to deteriorate, right? That included. But there's a couple different kinds of deafness that we can have. The first is called conduction deafness. That's a problem with the middle ear. It's a mechanical problem. So what's the middle ear made up of again? Yeah, those three little tiny bones, right? So that's a mechanical failure. It's a problem with the shape, size, movement of those three little bones in your middle ear. There's also something called, so conduction deafness is something that you'd be born with. It's a birth defect, really, of the bones of your middle ear. There's also something called nerve deafness, and this takes place in that inner ear and going to your auditory nerve. Nerve deafness is the kind of deafness that we would have as we get older, if you had certain diseases, or it can come on from continuous exposure to loud noise. So when your parents are constantly telling you to like turn your music down and stuff like that, that can lead to nerve deafness. Nerve deafness is irreversible. Conduction deafness with certain surgeries might be able to be reversed. You might be able to repair the bones. Nerve deafness, once we've damaged that nerve, it's irreversible. Now, of course, it's not really specifically the loud music that's going to get you. What kind of people, what kind of environment do you think people would be in to get nerve deafness? Military, okay. Construction. Concerts, you say? Yeah. Yep. Yeah, yep, people that work back there. What else? Yeah, I guess construction is like a big one, military. What's that? Yeah, yep. So those kinds of job situations, we're exposed to really loud noises. And even with as much, ear protection as you can use, that gets through. And again, unfortunately, that damage is irreversible. Nerve damage is irreversible, unless you can figure out how to get stem cells in.
So like conduction deafness, like those videos where they have kids hearing for the first time or something.
Yeah, that's when
That's conduction deafness.
that's when they fixed whatever was maybe wrong. Like they could redo the bones, do a surgery. Yeah, so that's what you'll see. Yeah. So conduction deafness. So I have, in my family, I have a couple people who are deaf, were deaf from birth. And, well, I have a cousin, and she married another man who's deaf from birth. They have 2 children, and both of them hear fine. They don't have any issues. But there is some genetic link with that conduction part. Where do you see that come from? How do we suspect that that's likely true anyway?
Because my parents were worried about me.
Yes,
It might not affect this child, but this child could be very
sure, right? If we know it's a mechanical, like a deformity, right, then we can suspect that there's at least some genetic link to it. It's still not totally predictable, though. You know how we talked, I know we didn't talk in this class, but when you're pregnant, you go for genetic testing. Do you guys know about that at all? Okay. So there are some things that you can find out very early on in your pregnancy, but something like the formation of these bones is not something that you could predict. So we don't know for sure about the genetic link, but we suspect that there is one. Okay, the next sense we're going to talk about is smell. And when we smell, it's,
I have a question real quick about
sure,
hearing.
yeah.
Some people that like have hearing aids, what is, because that's not really a surgery or anything, so
How does that work?
what does it?
Yeah.
It amplifies, so when they have nerve deafness, which is, so hearing aids you could use for either type of deafness, okay? If you're using it for conduction deafness, it's going to send a clearer message. It's going to do part of the job of that middle ear to get the information to your inner ear. Once the information gets to your inner ear, you're good with conduction deafness, right? So that's one type of hearing aid. The other type that works for nerve deafness is going to project the information a little bit further through.
Yeah, 'cause there's a cochlear.
Right. Yep. So you get the information into that middle ear so that it can get, if there's a cochlear implant, that information gets sent to the inner ear, which is where you're having problems.
Okay, because my friend, when she was younger, she had, I can't remember what it's called, but it was something wrong with her spinal cord.
Mm-hmm.
And, so because of that, it made her completely deaf in one ear and mostly deaf in the other. So she has to wear a hearing aid, but it's not.
Not 100%. Oh, not a cochlear hearing.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Gotcha. And does she have full hearing with the hearing aid? No. Okay. So she had damage probably to her auditory nerve that was related to the damage to the spinal cord. Yeah. And those are the ones that are a lot tougher to recover from. Nerve damage is bad, as a general rule. There's a lot of things we can fix with modern medicine, but that's still not one of them. I'm sorry, were there any other questions? I guess I moved quickly through that on hearing. Okay. All right, so now moving on to smell. And we all know we have differing sense of smells. The process of smelling is called olfaction. And what you actually do when you smell is that you're inhaling airborne molecules through your nose and throat. So we're bringing in actual physical molecules. Okay, so these molecules that are floating around out in the environment that we bring in, they go to what's called the olfactory epithelium. Any guesses on what that is? What's an epithelium? Tissue, a little membrane, little skin. So we have at the roof of our mouth, towards the back, there's a lining that goes to the roof of the nasal cavity, right? So from here, you can't really, if you put your finger back in the top of your palate, you could feel it a little bit. So that's where our olfactory epithelium is. And that's where the molecules go when we bring them in. And again, we have little hair-like receptors. They bind to whatever the appropriate odor molecule is. So epithelium. It's like a little membrane, little flap of skin. And it has little hairs that these molecules can bind to. Okay, and when they do that, they are again converted into a neural impulse, right? That's what we need to do with all this information. And they're sent directly to the olfactory bulb. Where do you think your olfactory bulb is? I mean, probably somewhere in your nose, right? Under their frontal lobes, yeah. So if you think about the top of your nose and where that might be on the inside, It's under your frontal lobe. So where's the odor going to go then? Odor information. To your brain, right? To your frontal lobe, and it'll disperse it to wherever it needs to go. Do you guys remember what part of our brains are responsible for memory, emotion, and smells? The part of our brain that links smells with memory and emotion? Yep, our limbic system. Good. All right, so that's why smells are often strongly associated with emotional memories. All right, other things that we are breathing in besides toxins and free radicals and pollution are pheromones. Anybody ever heard of pheromones before? What do you think about when you think of pheromones?
Like bees.
Bees? Okay. What does it do for bees?
I don't know.
What?
Don't they use pheromones? I don't know what they do with them.
Yeah, tell them where to go. Yeah. Yep. Pheromones, when I think of them, I think of people saying that, you know, men and women give off pheromones, and that like induces, yeah, like the idea of sexual attraction is related to pheromones, to a certain smell. Yeah. Great.
That's what they do.
Yes, like a dog in heat.
There's one that wanders around my neighborhood.
All right. So, like a dog in heat, people have these pheromones. So pheromones are chemicals. They're airborne because there's molecules in the air, right? And there's different things that they do. Apparently, we can recognize our own family members by like their smell. Now, this isn't like, oh, I know her perfume, right? This is a different level of pheromones are chemicals that you give off. They can also incite aggression, territorial marking, right? You know, if you have a male dog that goes outside and like sniffs everywhere, and everywhere he sniffs another dog he has to pee, that's like a pheromone thing, right? And it's also sexual attraction and mating. So those are the different things that we're smelling when we're picking up those chemicals in the atmosphere. All right, the next sense we're going to do is taste, our sense of taste. Now, the process by which we taste things is called gustatory. So a lot of times, taste and smell are linked together, right? You know, if you smell something, you can sort of taste it, good or bad, right? A really bad smell, you can often like have that taste in your mouth, and it's just terrible. So they're very much linked. And when you think where the organs are and the process of them, that makes sense, right? The major function of both of them, what do you think it is? Why do we have taste and smell?
I guess so, like, know what we're putting ourselves around.
Know what we're putting in our bodies, right? And so specifically to help us avoid putting bad things in our bodies. So if you smell, I don't know, if you're going to eat a piece of turkey or something, and you go to put it on your sandwich, and it smells pretty bad or off to you, what are you going to do?
Run away.
Hope so, right? Hopefully. What'd you say?
Sour milk.
Sour milk. Oh, yeah. Yep. You don't want to find out after you drink your coffee, right, that the milk was bad. Yeah, after you pour your cereal.
That's terrible.
And those are some really obvious ones. And then we know that we talked about like classic condition, like taste aversions, right? Why we wouldn't eat a berry. Like if you bit into something that made you sick or was very, very bitter or sour, that might be a sign that you don't want to eat that's not good for you, right? So that's the main function of them, because we don't actually need them for other purposes, really, do we? I mean, you can eat and swallow without tasting. And you could get through life without smelling, right? It's not gonna like go too many problems. Maybe you'd notice a fire a little less quickly or something, you know. But hopefully you'll see the smoke, so you'll see okay. Yep.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
What could affect someone not being able to smell?
Like what kind of damage or disease?
Well, yeah, that. But I've also heard people say like when they were drunk they couldn't smell anything. So like like, is that true? Or
Gosh, I don't know. I know that there are people.
not, it wasn't me, but like.
Someone who isn't me said that. There are people that have a better or worse sense of smell in general, right? And that, if that's just like a general thing, that would have to do with the hairs on the olfactory epithelium. Maybe they have fewer, maybe they're not as efficient. An altered mental state like that, I don't know. I haven't heard that, but that's interesting. Maybe you want to look into that for extra credit or something. I read an article recently about a woman who, I think she took a medication and it had an a bad effect, and she lost her sense of taste. And she couldn't taste anything. And her story was awful. She talked about how depressed she got, how like deprived. She talks about a moment where she was so sort of feeling low, and because what does food give us besides nutrition and happiness, right? Or comfort, enjoyment, right? You bite into something that tastes good. I mean, so she literally got none of that from any food, and she lost a bunch of weight. I guess she just had no interest in eating, and she talks about a night where she was feeling so down, and she couldn't, nothing was happening, and she talks about considering taking a couple of her husband's Vicodin just so she could like be in an feel better about her. Like she was just feeling so down and miserable and couldn't get any comfort or joy. And I think eventually it came back slowly. But it was over a year, maybe close to 2 years, before it started coming back. And it was a terribly depressing story that I, hadn't really thought too much about. And I would imagine, what's that? I'm sure she did. Yeah. I would imagine if you were born with no sense of taste, that's always that chicken or the egg thing. And not knowing what you were missing.
But since she had it.
Right. And people talk about blindness that way too, right? Is it better to be born with sight so that if you go blind, you have these memories of what things look like? Or is it better to not know?
So much sadder, like.
Right. And they say people lose their hearing, right? And that's something that really happens all the time. You're born with hearing, and then gradually you could lose it. So that's always something to think about, especially as we talk about our senses as they relate to psychology and our thoughts and feelings and behaviors, how those things can sort of affect people. Okay, so again, smell, taste, the point is, yep. Well, that part of that depends on if their brain has never seen something, there's nothing to see. Well, don't you have people talk in your dreams?
They just hear things, they don't see people.
Yeah, it's just black and they just hear voices.
How could you know? How could your brain ever know anything? There might be like some,
Like my dream last night.
like you weren't hearing voices, they were actually in your dream?
Yeah, they
Oh,
were
good.
in my dream.
Yeah, you can imagine.
Their dream, they can imagine they're seeing.
But how would their brain know?
Is it possible for them to use towards you dreaming they can see?
Okay.
Like if a past relevance is like a description of something.
Yeah.
Then the brain can build a mental image.
Sure. And we could also, they talk about people who are blind having hearing like dolphins, like where it bounces off things, so you can sort of,
Echolocation.
yes, echolocation. They do that in a movie, Daredevil.
There's some, oh,
Yeah, he does it there. Is it her? Who's the one that's blind?
The girl in red. She kills people.
Yeah, she's blind? Yeah, that's her. Okay.
And then she meets somebody who's also blind. Sure.
Oh,
We meet some.
they do. And they get married in real life, those two. Yeah, they do.
That was
Helen Keller.
Yeah, she
Helen Keller's, did you guys know who she is? It's like one of the most inspirational stories. Yeah, she's blind and deaf, and she has a wonderful teacher that works with her, and she holds her face while she talks, and she learns the vibrations that just really super. Did you guys see the news story yesterday about the little boy here? He's just had his 13th birthday here in the area, and he's born, he has a combination of illnesses that nobody else in the world has. And he just turned 13. The doctor said he wouldn't make it. He's blind, he has type 1 diabetes, he has Down syndrome, he's got a cardiac condition, a respiratory condition, and some genetic, like a Fragile X or something like that. So speaking of, like, I'm thinking of Helen Keller losing 2 senses, right? Made me think of what that young boy, but he just turned 13. They asked him what he wanted to do when he grew up, and he said he wanted to be able to walk. So there's that. A little tearjerker on the news last night.
Is it okay if I
Yeah, absolutely.
just do it?
Oh, thank you. Okay, so we know why we have taste receptors, but let's talk about a little bit of the process of it. Our taste organ is what? Tongue, right? So our taste receptors, our taste buds, are located on our tongues. They're just little buds, little taste buds, and they're also at the back of the mouth and up on your palate a little bit. Palate, like the roof of your mouth. On our tongues, we all know we've got bumps that we can feel, right? Those are called papillae. And those little bumps are what hold our taste buds. So when we eat, we chew our food, hopefully, right? And it sort of dissolves some. And as it does that, the liquid of it sort of runs over our papillae, over our little bumps, and it goes into the taste buds. All right, so when it goes into the taste buds, we're going to have 5 receptors for that. We have 5 major taste sensations. Anybody know what they are? Sweet, salty. Okay, we got sweet, salty, sour, bitter, and umami, right? Umami is savory. Umami you get from meats and things like that. It's a savory sensation. What's that? What are our flavors? We have sweet, sour, bitter, salty, and umami. None of you guys know what umami is?
I feel like I've heard of it.
What's that?
I've only heard that there's 4. Never used it.
Is anybody like a foodie?
Foodie.
Yeah.
What's that?
Like you're into food?
Yeah, I would hope that's everyone.
You guys don't know these terms?
Foodie. I've never heard that in my life.
Like the New York Times has a foodie article every week.
Yeah, I know you told me. No.
Do you, Alex? Foodies are like, like restaurant snobs, and they're all into like high-end cooking and where.
Like the guy off of Ratatouille.
Yeah, all right, Ratatouille.
You mean like food critics?
Not exactly, but yes, food critics would be foodies.
People that just love food.
There's, you guys know about like the whole slow foods movement.
Slow foods.
All right, this is your homework. Seriously.